Hello, welcome everybody. It feels like a game show, doesn't it? Whereas actually it's not. It's an important discussion about conflict and climate, conflict and environment. I'm very happy to be here. I can't profess to be a world expert on this topic, but I have some experience. I was for 13 years the Director of Communications and spokesperson for the UN Environment Programme headquartered in Nairobi. And one of its former directors, the now passed away, but former German Environment Minister Klaus Topfer, set up in the 1990s something called the Post-Conflict Assessment Unit. And it was his sincere belief that when you have a war, the first thing when the war ends, of course, is you must care for the people. But if you don't care for the environmental damage, if you don't repair the environmental damage from a conflict, then that country and those people and that economy is always going to struggle or will only slowly recover from the damage of a war. And you must assess the damage, and then you must get the finance to repair the damage in a post-conflict setting. And that was also an interesting thing to be exposed to as well, because the Serbian war, but also wars in other places, but also they extended their work to what you might call conflicts over resources. So one post-conflict assessment was in Nigeria, in Ogoniland, where there's always been conflict between the local people and the oil industry. So conflict and war, there are different ways of describing what it is, and I think we should just bear that in mind too. I'm also very happy to be here because I think that this is a very important climate conference that you are part of. And what is happening on the other side over there is a fight over finance, right? And the assessments are that the developing countries need $1 trillion a year. Well, I can think of one place where that could come from straight away, can't you? The cost of wars, right? 2.7 trillion at the moment, the wars that are going on are costing. So there is the money already to provide the funding for the developing countries to actually green their economies, but also build resilience against the climate catastrophe, which is on its way if we don't act swiftly. So there are many ways of looking at this, and I'll finish on that note, and I would like to call the wonderful guests who are more experts than me on this topic to come on down. Can everybody come in, please? You could also run, or you could, yeah, okay. Max, it's anywhere is fine. Oh yeah, maybe next to your picture is a good idea. But that would be quite funny if you could move the pictures around during the show and then people would have to, you know, like musical chairs. Can you see your picture? You're here. That means I'm here. Let's go this way. It's a bit of a party game, isn't it? Okay, lovely. Thanks very much indeed. So I think let's start off first about, you know, conflict in terms of the appalling damage it can cause to countries, not just the people, but also the general environment as well. Maybe we could look at that. And you feel free to express whatever you want to express in terms of your perspective on this topic, yeah? So Max, tell us about you. You're from the Ukraine. Can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, it's for, by the way, also for everybody here, we drop the, so just Ukraine.
Okay.
Yeah. Right, so my name is Max. I make YouTube videos. I make educational videos online about careers, business, global affairs, charity, those kinds of things. I'm from Ukraine. I left 12 years ago, and I'm based in London currently. The question was around...
Well, I mean, the issue of conflict and,
yeah.
and environment, is that part of your world or
Yeah, very much so. I mean, for me, I firstly kind of discovered conflict, and then I discovered environment because the war started 10 years ago, and I'm from the region south of Ukraine that was very badly affected. And I kind of started talking about the war then, and then I started talking about climate 2 years ago. So for me, kind of conflict came first, and for 8 years of the war, I didn't really think about the environmental repercussions, and I think I really started to think about the environment in context of the Russian invasion of Ukraine after the Novakhovka Dam got destroyed. And I'm from near there, and actually it was my great-grandpa who was opening that dam, and for my grandma, this was like her childhood experience because she cut the ribbon to the opening. She was kind of fancy like that. So seeing that destroyed and then seeing the damage that it has caused, that was pretty insane. So I was like, okay, this is a very serious issue. I wouldn't say it's top of mind for Ukrainians. Climate repercussions right now are not top of mind, but we do still think about them.
Mm. But the environmental impacts, if you put the climate aside, the environmental impacts, I think, does concentrate the minds of many people. I mean, the loss of productive agricultural land to weapons, forests on fire, you know, from the destruction of that river also damaged fish stocks, I think, down the river system. But interestingly enough in the Ukraine, and I think this is something that maybe many people don't know, is that simultaneously as Ukraine is having to deal with this ongoing conflict, the government of the Ukraine is already assessing and planning the restoration of the Ukraine, and even, can you believe, but I'm just being honest there, has the optimism to even be optimistic about doing different things when the war ends. So, for example, the dam that was destroyed, and I'm sure everyone saw that on TV, they're even discussing that now the land that has become available, maybe they don't need a dam. Maybe they will actually either plant new forests to absorb carbon and, you know, boost nature, or even thinking about perhaps renewable energy being installed on that. And also they want to turn Chernobyl, that was the old Soviet nuclear power plant in Ukraine, which, you know, was a real shock when that happened in the, what was it, the late 90s, was it? Or was it the early 2000s? I can't remember, 80s maybe. Radioactive, that they want to actually turn that into a renewable energy center. So simultaneously, the government of Ukraine is dealing with a war and a conflict against an aggressor, and at the same time is actually thinking, what do we do afterwards with the situation that, let's do something positive. So that's quite special, I think. Let's talk about that maybe later. But Max, thank you. Lena, tell us a little bit about your perspective of this topic on conflict and climate. Have you got a microphone there? No, steal Max's, or if the one's not working around here, go for the handheld. It is now working. Fantastic. Then you can give that back to Max, and yeah, here we go.
Hello everyone. My name is Lina Isa. I'm Sudanese. I'm 22 years old. I've been displaced from Sudan to Egypt last year because there's the war going on our country. And it is not just a war, like meaning the war, it's also a war in women's body, and there's a lot of people killed like every day, every night, and every hour, and this it is not just affected us, it affects the environment as well, and affect all the Sudanese and all the maybe countries around us, because Sudan is full of resources. So at first, when this war broke out, I was sleeping, and then I've just heard some bombing around us, because you know, there's some problems with Sudanese. Maybe it's just 4 years ago, and now like a lot of Sudanese, thousands and billions of Sudanese got displaced. And in Sudan, like they either can't leave Sudan or they are already outside Sudan. And the people inside Sudan suffering and outside suffering, but of course the inside people are suffering the most. And I'm not talking about suffering just on a people, it's also the environment, because a lot of buildings and administration fall out. And the education, literally we are now, there is no food in Sudan. There is no education happening for me as well. Like my university stopped. So I'm not talking about the war or the land. It's just a land, or the environment. It's not just environment. It is not just a place for us. Like it's a life, memory, a heart of our community. and I can just make it relatable more to the climate and conflict, because now if I can speak like more about the environment place, because we are facing that a lot of people got killed. It's either by a conflict of climate, there is no security for food, air polluted, and a lot of women got raped as well, and they just turned out to suicide and so yes, it's a little bit about what's happening actually in Sudan.
Okay, so that's a good perspective into that. And maybe you could just explain to the audience, Climate Sirens, because I can see there are two people here from this organization. What does that, when was it started and what is the purpose?
If it started this year, Climate Sirens is a radical feminist collective dedicated to amplifying the voices of women in this one region, Southwest Asia and North Africa. We are leading the fight against and the fight for climate justice. We've started like in decolonialism, and also we are calling for the inclusion, not just for the isolation, because we know like women are suffering a lot, especially in these spaces, and maybe the most important thing that what happened in Afghanistan as well, like a lot of things against women. And so climate justice, climate science is here to fight against and to fight for the climate justice itself. So yes.
So maybe later we could also talk about not just women as victims of this, but also women as enablers and catalysts for positive change. And that's also the flip side of this story, isn't it?
Yes.
Yana, you're from Lebanon, I see. Is that correct?
Jana.
Sorry, Jana, you're from Lebanon, right?
Yeah, actually, I'm from Palestine originally, and I'm a refugee. I have refugee status, and I went through, like, I am double refugee, if you want me to say, like, in more elaborated way. So I'm Palestinian refugee. I'm based in Lebanon. And if you want to ask me about the link between the conflict and climate, I have really witnessed it by my people in Lebanon and also my people in Palestine, because the war in Palestine in the last few months or in the last year have really impacted the environment. The bombs that have been launched into Gaza, it's 70,000 tons of bombs, and most of the bombs contain and entail phosphor in it, and we all know what phosphor, like when it enters the soil, how it can contaminate the soil and contaminate the water. So no soil and no water, so eventually there will be no life. And in Lebanon as well, there's also war happening now, and the occupation is erasing the agricultural lands by destroying it, by bombing. Like everyone now in Lebanon, Lebanon is most people in Lebanon rely on agriculture and their agricultural land. For example, the olive trees, and now they are prevented from harvesting their olive trees. And we, as Palestinian or Lebanese, or like from our region, we really like connected to the olive trees. It's not like it's not just the trees. It reflects peace. It reflects to us resilience. And for this reason, erasing these trees is also erasing our identity. So it's not only about like environment and conflict. It's something related to ethnically cleanse us and ethnically cleanse the environment and make this place uninhabited. We can't like live in it.
And what's the air like? I mean, when after a bomb attack, what is the quality of the air like? The air.
Yeah, even the air is polluted. Lots of carbon dioxide emissions are in the air because of the war and because of the bombing. And even if we want to talk about like if we want to think about the war now stops, and we will continue to move forward and to move to rebuild like these destructions. Even the rebuilding of this destruction will entail in it like lots of carbon dioxide emissions, And like nobody is talking about either, like even in Sudan, even in Lebanon, Palestine, all of our countries, no one is taking steps and moving forward toward like rehabilitation or rebuilding. We only like everything is witnessing now is war. The war is not ending. No one talking about like the next step forward. So yeah, and we should also look from an environmental perspective. Not only like even the environment is suffering nowadays.
Good points, and yeah, I mean you make some good points from the fact that actually when bombs hit ground or fields or things like that, it doesn't just destroy the crops, it doesn't just poison the soil, but it disrupts the soil in such a way that huge amounts of carbon come out. And then if you start blowing up cars and oil installations, and we said before, trees get on fire, they're releasing carbon. Everything's basically carbonized and going out into the atmosphere. Whilst at the same time people are suffering. So it's kind of a double whammy, right? The environment gets hit bad as well as the people. And these are intertwined because our environment and ourselves, we are living things. We are part of the environment ourselves, you know, we feel it. We'll come back to that. Stay with us. So, Louise, you're from UNICEF. Tell us a little bit about your work and relationship with this topic.
Thank you, yeah. So we are the Children's Agency for the UN, obviously, and we are here this week to try and ensure that both the policy and the financing that's been negotiated over the way is responding to the needs of children. So there are 5 billion children in the world who are living at extremely high risk of climate change impacts, and we know that war makes that worse. So just thinking about your point about the carbon, babies breathe twice as fast as adults. So they're taking in, their lungs are taking in pollution, environmental pollution at a much higher rate. Babies that are born in heat waves, for example, much more likely to be born too soon, to have all the kind of stunting implications in that is. Children who are in war zones are 20 times more likely to die of preventable diseases than of the initial impact of war and conflict. And of course, what that means is the children need far more healthcare support in those situations. And what does war do? It destroys infrastructure. So in situations where children need much more healthcare support, where women also do, they have actually less. So we're really concerned with the kind of long-term impacts, both of environmental degradation and of conflict, and how those kind of integrate, and how, as you were saying about Ukraine, governments who are trying to deal with the day-to-day, the here and now, can also be thinking about reconstruction, rebuilding, how they can actually develop infrastructure that is resilient both to climate shocks and to warfare. It's a very, very difficult situation.
And of course in Palestine at the moment, it's been very hard to get
the
medication in, let alone the food, and I mean that just piles up the damage on young growing children and babies,
And in Palestine, we are with WHO, we're doing a lot of polio vaccination. Now, polio was almost eradicated, so close. But we see in times of war, in times of conflict, where access is difficult, that polio makes a resurgence. So in Pakistan, in Afghanistan, and now in Palestine also.
So, we're in danger of slightly drifting off the climate subject there, but we had to reflect that as well, I think, in this conversation, because you know, health is part of it. But I mean, the link was there with Lebanon. I mean, human health, breathing in places where there is a war on and there is pollution in the air is not good for a normal person, and certainly, clearly, not good for babies breathing so much more than maybe an adult is. When you say that you're eco-feminists, what do people say to you? Do they go, what's that? Are they shocked? Can they get their head around the concept of an eco-feminist? Please, I'm just curious on that one. What's the reaction when you say that you're eco-feminist? Are people like, wow, let's do it? Or are they like, what's that? Either of you.
Can I start?
Yes.
Like in our region, it's really hard to tell people that you work in climate, because climate thing in our region is something like people underestimate, like what is climate change, and being a female working in climate, it makes the thing like worse. So people in our communities like underestimate the power of women and the power of females. And when a female working in something that they already underestimate, it's really funny. Like people, when I started working in climate, people started like laughing and and making fun. Like, what are you talking about? What's the point of your, like, you're not gonna make the world better place when you're working on in climate. So yeah, it's the first, yeah, when we started, it was really hard to be taken seriously as women working. But with time and with work and with hard work and with like the outcomes and the things we were able to make, you can like prove yourself in these spaces.
Lina?
Yes, I agree with Jana because I've faced this a lot, especially in our communities. As she mentioned that a lot of people underestimate the power of women or the power of feminists. Like you are saying, feminists, are you going just like to change the world with what? With the women voices? Cause like it's so neglected. But when the concept of eco-feminist like showed up, there's a lot of maybe people being noticed about it, because you don't know the thing until you actually know it or until you actually get to know about it. So they started maybe to notice us, to notice our voices, our demands, what we are asking for, and the life of feminists. It's not just thing we are demanding or asking just for equality. We actually need like maybe yani equal life with all of us, like women, men, children, and for the eco-feminist as well. We just need to live in peace, in a good environment, in a good climate, and everything. So yeah, and so when maybe nowadays when a lot of institutions or maybe our communities are self-seeing us representing Sudan and Palestine and Lebanon as well, they are saying to us like, we are really proud of you. Okay, when we at first started like in Sudan or in Palestine, no one is believing us literally, but now they all showing us the solidarity and the inclusion, and we are with us, and like we just need to figure out, we just need to scream out and speak up, and then maybe they will literally notice us or know more about us. So yeah.
I would like to add something. Like part of our mission at Climate Science is to like our region, the Swana region, the women in the Swana region had all the practices, sustainable practices. So we are trying to amplify these practices and to bring them now to the front line, because it's aligned somehow like with sustainability and with sustainable practices. And when we planned like to start doing this, we noticed the huge gap between there's no like knowledge and resources. Like we know the practices from our like ancestors, the grandparents and grandmothers, for example, but we don't have the real resources. And this is an issue, because when you will like make or try to work on getting the resources, you need to reach out to these women or to these indigenous women and reach out like to them, specifically to their regions. And this is also a challenge for us, like reaching out to them and getting like the indigenous knowledge and then bringing it to the front line nowadays. This is also really challenging now.
So we talked a little bit about what what conflict does to climate. I mean, it increases emissions. We're just talking about it now scientifically. It increases emissions. There are lots of assessments to demonstrate the level of emissions from also the manufacture of the armaments as well in the first place. That's a heavy, intense industry, steel and all the other things that generate a lot of carbon. Then, of course, we've also talked a little bit about the indirect, the burning of trees and the damage of agricultural lands and things like that. But there is a flip side to this, which is, we're here at a UN climate conference, the 29th conference of the parties to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, if you want the full jargon. If we don't deal with climate change, if we don't solve climate change, if we don't keep a global temperature rise no higher than 1.5 degrees centigrade, and every 10th of a degree counts in terms of impact, then we are likely to have more extreme weather events, as we all know, and more floods and droughts and hurricanes, and also perhaps more stress on people, but also natural resources. What do you think climate change might do if it's uncontrolled to conflict and war? Louise?
Thank you. I just wanted to challenge you a little bit on that,
Oh,
because
good. Okay.
this is already happening. You know, maybe not to me, and I live in Europe, so it's a bit easier for me, but already there are whole countries who are flooded every year, who have heat waves, who are living in drought-affected regions all the time. And coming back to what Jana was saying, a lot of the problems that we see are because children, young people, whole communities, they don't understand what's happening to them. So a lot of the work that UNICEF does is about actually teaching children about climate change and what it is and why their school gets destroyed every year by a flood. And then starting to provide assets and resources for young people to actually be advocating in their communities to adapt now, because this is not a future problem. This is a now problem, isn't it? In a way, this is a conflict, this is an emergency, and we should be treating it like that. And I'm speaking to the converted here, but I just want to say that for us as UNICEF, we're absolutely committed to 1.5. Of course we are, who wouldn't be? But we're also really committed to helping communities to be resilient now, to adapt now, because actually otherwise there won't be a future, maybe for someone like me in Europe, but certainly not for vast reams of the globe who are already suffering from climate impacts, and they will remain even if next year we were at 1.5 by some miracle. So we need to treat it as a conflict. We need to treat it as a war in that sense. And it's easy in these big environments to be a bit depressed. But actually, we should all be eco-feminists. That is the way to be, to equip people to know what they can do now in their communities.
Mm. Do you feel that sense of urgency that the world needs to solve climate change? I'm not saying that climate change, or I don't think anybody is saying that climate change is the only reason for conflict. I mean, there are many factors, right? But for many so-called experts, and I'm not one of them, but for many experts I've read, they say that it's a threat multiplier, that it's just another additional stress on stressed circumstances. Do you feel that?
I think we need to end the wars first.
Yeah.
Then, like climate change will end eventually if we took the decision to end war, all wars around the world, because wars are really now contributing in a huge carbon dioxide emissions and biodiversity loss and so many issues related to the climate. So I think we must first solve the wars issue. When we will have no war, no climate, the climate will not be changing. This is my point. And this is how I see things, because we really witnessed how war affect the climate in our region and also beyond, not only in our region.
But in places like Sudan, do you think climate change is having an impact on conflict?
Yes, the fact that
Microphone, everybody? Can we turn this just up a little bit, please? Yeah, take the handheld,
like in Sudan, is truly happening now, because the climate change and war, they are literally related, because before that, as Sudanese, and we know Sudan as its resources of nature, and we are part of nature, and there's a lot of countries maybe getting some resources of us, and because land of Sudan, it's so rich of resources. And now after the war, it's literally being limited, and for us as Sudanese, we can't get it. So the rest of the countries can't get it as well. But there is the reason of the war can't get it. So we can't have our land, we can't have the resources of our land. So the climate itself wouldn't just be for us, it's going to be for someone else. A lot of people will just came to our land and just took all the resources that we should have it for us. So for us, even my grandma, and she's working in a farming for too long, maybe for 50 years, and now after the war she been displaced to another country, and now like the real resource of her life and also for her work itself is stopped just because of the war. So like a lot of Sudanese having the resources of their life being stopped, and also, so yes, it's totally related that the climate and the environment itself being affected by us, and we can affect the climate back and the environment back. So, yeah,
Yes, it's in the power of humans to restore these damaged lands and restore these environments, restore these degraded lands, and bring it back to health again. But increasingly scaling average temperatures around the world and the extreme weather events that go with it will make even the restoration harder. So I think probably the thing is, absolutely, I think nobody in this room would disagree that we must stop conflict. It's in nobody's interest, right, apart from maybe 2 or 3 people who decide they want to have a war, right? But the rest of us, we don't want to be involved, right? We don't want it to happen. But I think that governments and humanity can keep 2 ideas at least in their heads at the same time. We must stop war, but we must also deal with climate change and see also perhaps connections between the 2.
I think we can summarize all of this by making our attention to the people and planet rather than the profit. And this is like summarize everything going on now in our world.
We've completely ignored Max, and this isn't really fair, right? That's because he's not doing a YouTube video right now. So maybe he is quietly when we're not looking. But Max, you've been listening to a little bit of this, and does some of it seem new, and is it something that could be YouTubeable, if that's actually a word? YouTubeable? Have I just created a new word?
Pretty sure people have said that before. People probably would have said, there is this app, this AI thing that has written every single letter and word combination and sentence and paragraph combination in every language that can possibly be written. So right now, there is nothing you can say that hasn't been written.
Okay.
So it's like...
So we all have to keep quiet now then.
Yeah.
Let AI get on with it.
Yeah, I was at COP last year, and most of my videos are not about climate, although some of them are. Climate, environment, sustainable energy, that kind of thing. And I was at COP last year, and there was an American panel, and they were talking about, like we should stop climate change. And I was like, yeah, that's true. They were like, we should get the high-income countries to help low-income countries finance climate action. I'm like, yeah, this is good. Then we were like, we should divest the resources from the defense spending we use to send money abroad, and we should take this money, put to climate. I'm like, wait, what? No, this is not it. Not at all, because it's, from my perspective, for example, the Russian government doesn't care about the impact of the invasion and the war on climate change. Like, do we agree on this? From what we know, they
It's
probably don't care.
probably a pretty fair assessment.
Yes,
yeah.
I don't think they're losing any sleep over the CO2 emissions or much worse things that they do. And from our perspective, the idea that the money should go from the support of our partners and our allies and our ability to defend the existence of our country to finance long-term climate solutions for an average Ukrainian, this is an absolutely ridiculous idea, and it's very, very difficult to make it popular, to explain it. So to me, I do agree with you. Right now we have 193 conflicts around the world. Over the last 10 years, the number of civilians who have died in conflict has increased year on year, every year. For me, obviously, Ukraine is the closest one, because this is my family and my country, but it's not the only one. So I agree that if you're from Ukraine, or if you're from Lebanon, specifically southern Lebanon, if you're from Palestine, talking about the emissions that the bombs cause seems so distant from the actual immediate grief and pain that every family is feeling. Yeah, so for me, I always struggle with this idea that in the long run, actually, climate change can be more deadly and can take more lives than the wars. But it, like right now, you need to be really careful to explain it to people in the countries that
if
are
you're being
affected.
attacked by a rabid dog in front of you right now, and somebody shouts out, "What about the rights of the dog?" Right, the human rights of this dog. You're not going to actually care about that in that second, right? You want to actually get the rabid dog away from the door, right?
Well, the dogs also don't have human rights.
Yeah, well, okay, fine. But some people care about
Dog rights.
animal welfare, right? But you're not going to care much about animal welfare when you're being attacked by that rabid dog. So I can fully understand. I think we can all fully understand.
But
you can't focus on climate change and things like that when you're in the middle of a conflict.
But there are some things that kind of just work out. I don't know if you guys have been to the Ukraine pavilion. A little bit biased, but I think it's the best pavilion this year. But there we have an installation of a solar panel that was destroyed by a Russian bomb, and that's actually from my hometown. And interestingly, for us, our energy grid is quite vulnerable to airstrikes, especially ahead of winter. Ukraine is a cold country, you know, so we need to heat ourselves. And it's relatively easy with the right intel to really challenge a power plant and to stop a power plant from operating for a few days. And if the power plant doesn't operate for a few days, for example, for my hometown in the south, this is a real problem. But with the solar panels, it's actually all the missiles could do is to destroy one panel, and it's not that big of a deal. We can just replace it. So in a way now we're looking at we have a big network of solar panels in Ukraine. It's actually enough. The electricity that we produce from solar power is enough to provide electricity for the entirety of Europe 7 times over. So we have a lot of those solar panels. So now we kind of, in terms of our military strategy, we discovered that renewable energy, specifically solar, is actually quite good because missiles are quite expensive. So destroying the solar grid is not a very smart investment on the Russian side. So
and it's distributed, isn't it? It's not the power plants are sort of big things,
precisely.
very obvious, standing in certain discrete locations.
And
whereas the
they
solar
don't
is
need as many
distributed.
personnel and like all that.
Exactly. No, you're absolutely right, and I think you're reflecting also the position of the Ukraine government again, because they want to, really ramp up the renewable energy grid to kind of get off that. There is another side to this story, though, and maybe it's just worth sharing briefly. But there is increasing concern. So, a modern renewable energy grid is basically highly digital. So it's connecting solar, wind, maybe some fossil fuel plants, gas plants. It's connecting all these different various forms of energy. And if you talk to some of the defense think tanks, there's an increasing worry that some countries, you might say, I know exactly which one you're talking about, may use various cyber attacks on these digital grids to again have an advantage over some other countries in terms of conflict. So in other words, the big fossil fuel power plants are very vulnerable to conventional weapons, but we need to defend the digital grids of renewable energy against another form of attack, which is cyber attack. I'm just putting that one out. So it's kind of an endless story, really. We have to keep our defenses up all the time. Do you think that it's possible in Lebanon, Palestine, and Sudan that when the conflicts are truly ended, that there should be a priority to rebuild in a different way these communities with this kind of renewable energy and not be dependent on liquid petroleum gas or charcoal in some places, right? To get off these forms of energy and move to something cleaner. And I mean, could this be the kind of the North Star, the South Star of optimism, that we could do something together as a global community to rebuild your communities together, hand in hand, with new kinds of energy systems?
Yes, I think it's much needed now. We need this like it should be a priority to like rebuild in a new way that align with climate action or sustainability, because the regions affected by war are really like the whole rebuilding thing will also emit carbon dioxide emissions. So we need to have a whole study, not like just we want to rebuild. No, this should be like really studied how the approach in order like to not worsen the case.
Yeah, I agree with Jenna also, because Sudan, Lebanon, and Palestine have a lot of resources. So whenever just people agree together to solve the problem, or just to solve this issue, it's going to be super possible, because we literally have the power. We just need the direction or the sustainable ways or sustainable practices that we really need to focus in on how all of us maybe build a collective just to rebuild all these conflict areas.
I want also to highlight something. Doesn't have to be like an answer to your question, but like here it's really funny like how the hypocrisy works. We are in climate conference and talking about climate action, and the same countries that are like talking, we want climate action, we want climate justice, are at the same time funding militarization, which we all know like how militarization affect and impact the environment. So I don't know if the whole war or climate issue will end or not, because it's always profit against people and planet. It will never be people and planet against against the profit.
Would you like the United Nations and the overseas development agencies of major countries like the US or Germany or the UK to stand up and say, look, we need peace in these countries, but we pledge that we will rebuild Palestine as a sustainable society with clean energy systems and all the things that are needed for a truly sustainable society, and the same, say, with Sudan and Ukraine, of course? I mean, is that something that you would look forward to? A clear roadmap that when the guns fall silent and the weapons stop flying, that there will be not only care for the people immediately, but also care for the environment in which they live, so that they can have sustainable livelihoods into the future.
Yes, it's so necessary to take the action starting from now. It's so necessary because a lot of people being killed, displaced, and so literally we need the land, and we need this land. We need it to be sustainable. We need it to be more suitable for all of us.
I think if this is something could be pledged and like a request, like an official request. This is because this is much needed. Like we need the support from the UN agencies in order to rebuild it in the like the proper way, which align with climate action and sustainability. Because the whole rebuilding process will take so much years. We'll have to have like so much funds, and we all know the gap we have in the climate finance or the climate fund. So we need this support.
And to defund the genocide, defund the ecocide as well.
Yeah. Ecocide. Now there's a word that's come up. Which anybody here know what ecocide is? Anybody? Hands up that have heard the word ecocide. Oh, one there, one there, one there, one over there. Okay. So there are some people campaigning for a new law, an international law, the law of ecocide, that would make it illegal to actually cause wide-scale environmental damage. It would be seen as a crime that could be taken to the international courts. That's correct, yeah? And so are you campaigning on that too? Yes. Mm-hmm. Are you on that one?
Well, I mean, international courts are incredibly effective, as we all know. So
you're being a little
as
sarcastic.
long as, let's, if it's a crime according to international courts, no one's going to do it.
So no one is caring about the people, so no one will care about the environment.
Okay, so let's just clear one thing up about these things. So you're absolutely right that nobody has to do it, but there becomes a principle that actually the law can start testing whether somebody should be held accountable. In other words, some people say you can't be prosecuted at the international court because if you're not caught and taken there, or if the government hasn't ratified that particular thing, you know, that it's weak, right? Some people say this about UN treaties like climate change. Well, nobody has to do anything. The interesting thing is that in many countries, they do actually, once something is agreed, translate it down into their national legislation, and then they can be held accountable through the national courts and the lawyers in those countries bringing a case, right? So I'm not saying it's perfect, but it's not a complete disaster.
No, I think it's a complete disaster.
Okay.
I think it's a complete disaster. I think the international law, international order, international court system has been exposed for not being able to function well, because we have countries that, of course, are breaking the international law by killing people in other countries en masse, and then they're also breaking the laws of war that is already illegal, so that the Geneva Convention openly, and then some of those country leaders are also criminals under the International Criminal Court, so there is citizens arrest and the signatories to that, but that doesn't happen. So it's like there is pretty much nothing you can do for it to be enough. If you're evil at your core and you dedicate your life to committing the worst atrocities possible, I still think that you wouldn't.
Weren't some of the people that were involved in the Balkan Wars in the late 1990s?
That was then.
Yeah.
I don't think it's the case. I don't think this
Okay.
is the case anymore.
I think we could have like an approach of making the same approach of making polluters pay. We have to make people, hold people like responsible to wars and ecocides accountable. At least they pay for rebuilding and making a new, like the new cities or the new. So they should be taken into accountability, but now no one is taken into accountability. None of the people contributing to it.
You're right also, because there are national means, and in some ways you might find that national bodies, national courts are more responsive to their own populations. And I live in Switzerland, and a group of women in Switzerland have recently won against the Swiss Federal Authority for climate and environmental damage that impacts on their own right to life and well-being, and they won. And in Switzerland, which is a very conservative country, it's had quite a big impact. And I do think, and I totally take your point in terms of international fora and courts and so on, but there is still a role for national courts, and that is why focusing on equipping children, young people to actually understand their rights, understand what's happening to them, I think can be still a very powerful tool to use.
We're going to have to wrap up in a second, but I just wanted to build on that, and I think you need to know. Maybe you're right on the actual criminal court thing, but certainly on what you're saying is this issue of people in their countries bringing cases against companies, but also governments for actually not following what they've said they're going to do on climate change. That legal action is actually growing, and at Imperial College London, there's a legal centre that tracks all the legal cases that are now happening on climate change, right? People actually damaging the atmosphere effectively, but not doing what they said they were going to do. And you've had cases in the Netherlands where an NGO brought the government to court and won because it wasn't actually achieving the targets it promised to do. And you've had airlines like KLM who have had ads that they were running saying if you fly on KLM, the air is cleaner afterwards, because they've been planting lots of trees. But yeah. And a court case was brought there against KLM. I'm not sure what the outcome on that is right now. Pardon? You won. Yeah. Okay, that's great. Fantastic.
Sorry, are you KLM?
I was going to say, I
Just
was going to mention
clarifying.
Client Earth in the next breath. And you need to know about Client Earth because this is a network of lawyers, not just in Europe and North America, but also in developing parts of the world who take on, they're professionals that take on cases on behalf of groups like NGOs where there is clearly a breach of that country's law in terms of, say, climate change and the targets they've set or whatever. But you're much more sophisticated at talking about this than me. But this lady over here you have to talk to afterwards. So, look, thank you very much indeed. This is a delicate topic, and I fully understand that, you know, it's very hard when one is in a conflict to actually look beyond that conflict to what we could do for these other issues like climate change and the environment and biodiversity as well, right? But there has to be at some moment an end, and then there has to be at some moment a perspective for the restoration of people's lives, and that includes the environment, right? Without it, we're not alive anyway. So thank you very much for being here. We could have talked longer, I'm absolutely sure. Max, I like your forthright views on things, that's really important. And I think one forgets that the role of UNICEF and the UN generally, which could do a lot more if the governments of this world actually put their hands into their pockets, as they should do, to actually properly fund the United Nations so it can actually do the job that they ask it to do, the governments ask it to do. But maybe one day we will get there. So thanks very much. Thanks to the audience. Thanks to the whoever is viewing this around the world. And it was a very interesting debate. Thank you very much indeed.